I was quietly reading a book in my room when, suddenly, my straight friend Henry walked in. What he did next will truly shock you. This all happened 2 weeks ago. The afternoon sun filtered through the gauzy curtains, casting lazy streaks of golden light across the floor and the rumpled sheets of my bed. It was that rare kind of silence, no traffic hum, no voices echoing from the living room, just the steady whirl of the ceiling fan and the soft rustle of paper with every page I turned. I was curled up in the corner of my bed, half sitting against a pillow propped on the wall, my legs stretched out under the blanket. The novel I was reading, a tale of angsty love filled with yearning and unspoken glances, had me completely absorbed. It was the kind of forbidden romance I would never admit enjoying aloud. I loved it because it let me experience secret emotions, feelings buried too deep to voice, and scenarios too dangerous to even wish for. As I turned another page, the main character confessed something to his best friend, a confession I knew I would never dare to voice in real life. Just then, my heart skipped a beat at the sound of familiar keys jangling at the front door. My chest tightened, and moments later, I heard the soft thud of the door closing, followed by a playful voice calling, "Yo, you home?" I froze, my eyes fixed on the word confession printed in the middle of the page. I didn't answer at first, hoping he assumed I was still asleep. Then his voice came closer, accompanied by light footsteps padding down the hallway, his sneakers likely abandoned at the door. "You're here. Your book's on the counter," he announced with a smile. I couldn't help but return that smile, knowing he always noticed every little detail. Within seconds, my bedroom door creaked open without a knock. Typical Henry. He stood in the doorway, wearing his usual half-ruined joggers and a white tank top that clung a little too perfectly to his frame. His hair, tousled from absent-mindedly running his hand through it, only amplified how effortlessly attractive he was, sending subtle shocks through me just by being there. "You really need to learn how to lock your door," he teased as he stepped in as though he owned the place. I looked up from my book with a playful smirk. "Ever consider knocking?" I retorted. Without missing a beat, Henry flopped onto my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight, and his thigh brushed gently against mine. I fought the urge to shift away, not because I disliked the contact, but because I wasn't sure I could handle it. Henry stretched his legs, yawned, and said, "Nah, I like keeping you on your toes. You're going to scare the life out of me one of these days. I already do, admit it." His voice was teasing, as always, yet there was something more in his eyes, a subtle vulnerability beneath his usual boyish charm. I tried to ignore it, hoping he'd soon lose interest and leave. Instead, he leaned in to read over my shoulder. "What's this one about? Another tragic romance?" he asked. I sighed and tilted the book away. "None of your business," I replied, though I couldn't resist adding, "Ooh, secret shame. That means it's juicy, Henry." Before I could continue, he plucked the book from my hands and held it up, squinting at the cover. "Summer by the lake. Sounds steamy," he remarked. "It's not," I said, reaching for it. "Give it back." He laughed and handed it back, but when our hands brushed, even just for a fleeting second, an electric spark shot through me. Although I'd felt this before, this time my reaction lingered too long, and I suddenly pulled away, embarrassed. Henry watched me silently for a moment. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, returning my gaze to the book. Reclining with his arms folded behind his head, his eyes wandered to the ceiling. "You're always in here reading. Don't you ever get tired of being alone?" "I'm not alone," I murmured. He tilted his head. "Yes, but I mean truly alone." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to admit that being alone was easier than facing the truth, because silence doesn't ask questions. "Books don't judge," I finally said. A faint smile graced his face as he added softly, "But they don't touch you either." My heart fluttered at his words, feeling the warmth they carried. "You're odd sometimes," I muttered. He chuckled and turned to face me. "So are you, that's why we're friends." As he adjusted his position, his arm brushed mine. Every nerve in my body seemed to tingle with anticipation. Then, almost too softly to catch, he asked, "Do you ever think about things being different?" I turned to him, met his gaze, a seriousness in his eyes I'd never seen before, and asked, "Different how?" He shrugged, but the gesture felt forced. "I don't know. Just not like this." I felt as if I were holding my breath. A silent current flowed between us, a current we had danced around for years without naming. I began to speak, but Henry abruptly sat up, ruffling his hair as if to shake off his thoughts. "I'm starving. Do we have any snacks?" And just like that, the moment passed, leaving behind the echo of unspoken questions. I couldn't stop thinking about that question or the way he'd looked at me when he asked it. My pulse quickened and my throat tightened. Soon Henry left for the kitchen. The door left ajar in his wake. I remained on the bed, heart racing and the book long forgotten in my lap. Even though he hadn't explicitly said it, I knew exactly what that moment had meant, and it scared me more than anything. The strangest part was that the story wasn't over yet. I could hear him rummaging in the kitchen, cabinet doors opening and closing, a metallic clang, and the hum of the refrigerator growing louder as it cycled on. My fingers traced the frayed edge of the book's cover, but my thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling around that single offhand question. "Do you ever think about things being different?" Its meaning was ambiguous, yet it resonated deeply. When Henry returned, he carried a bag of chips in one hand and 2 soda bottles tucked under his arm. He nudged the door open with his shoulder, entering as if claiming the space that was as much his as mine. Henry had never known personal boundaries, not out of disregard, but because they simply didn't exist in his world. He was the type to hug too long, lean in too close, and borrow my hoodie without ever asking or returning it. His touch was casual, confident, and I had spent years training myself to not flinch. He tossed a soda in my direction, and I caught it. The bottle's cold surface against my palm snapped me back. "Thanks," I murmured. Henry flopped back on the bed, twisted off the cap of his drink, and took a long, deliberate sip before offering me some chips. I shook my head. He simply shrugged, crunching loudly as he reclined beside me. His shoulder brushed mine again, and though I tensed, he either didn't notice or didn't care. I blinked at him, caught off guard by the intensity in his gaze. "Intense?" he murmured, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "You looked like you were about to cry or punch someone, or both." I lowered my eyes, thumb grazing the corner of the page during a particularly sad part. Henry studied me for a moment and, to my surprise, didn't tease me. Instead, he simply nodded as though he understood, even if he couldn't quite grasp what I felt. "What happens next in the story?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "It's about 2 people in love who can't confess their feelings to each other." His gaze didn't leave mine as he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd only seen when he was overwhelmed. "Everything reminds me of you," he said softly. "The way I feel when I'm around you lately. It's like I want something so desperately, yet I'm afraid that wanting it will ruin everything." His voice cracked slightly at the end, and hearing that nearly shattered me. I had always insisted that we could never be more than what we already were. I had buried the memory of my heart skipping when he brushed past me in the hallway, the way I memorized every detail of his laugh, and the hope that he would choose to spend the evening with me instead of alone in his own room. Now, with him sitting inches away, his eyes searching mine for permission to want more, I felt lost. "What do you want?" I whispered. Henry blinked before replying. "What do you want?" I forced my eyes to meet his. "You said it feels like you want something. So, what do you want?" The silence that followed seemed endless. He glanced down at his flexing fingers as if he didn't trust them, and then slowly, every movement deliberate, he reached out and placed his hand on mine. It was a tentative, quiet gesture, the slightest brush of his fingers, yet imbued with a weighty intimacy. He didn't immediately look at me, and I couldn't pull away even if I wanted to. After a moment, he murmured, "I don't know what this means," though I knew I never wanted it to end. My heart pounded so fiercely I was sure he could feel its tremble through our joined touch. I focused on our almost intertwined fingers, just close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, and suddenly, something long buried and aching within me broke free. "I don't want to stop either," I blurted before fear could steal the words away. Henry looked up, truly looking at me for the first time, and in his eyes I saw a mix of relief, fear, uncertainty, and, most unexpectedly, hope. That hope was raw and made my chest ache. He moved closer gradually, his thigh softly brushing against mine. I didn't flinch. He studied my face as if searching for hidden answers. "Can I try something?" he asked in a low, tentative voice. My breath caught, but I nodded. Then he leaned in slowly, hesitantly, as though giving me a chance to stop him if I wished, until his lips brushed mine as softly as a question. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. There was no explosion of the world around us. Yet, every fiber of my being reacted as if I'd awaited this touch all my life. My eyes fluttered shut as I inched closer, conveying that this was no mistake. Henry deepened the kiss gently, still unsure, as his hand slid from mine to the side of my neck, his thumb resting just below my jaw, grounding me. I felt his breath and his trembling hesitation. This was not a kiss born of lust or desperation, but a careful, curious exploration between two people learning a language they had never spoken aloud. When we finally pulled apart, we remained silent for a moment, our foreheads touching, breathing the same air, our hearts pounding in an uncertain rhythm. "I'm scared," Henry whispered, eyes still closed. "Me too," I replied softly. "But maybe that's okay." He nodded slowly, his hand still on my neck. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted, "and we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just stay here for now." Henry exhaled a shaky breath that seemed to release years of tension. He pulled back slightly to look at me, his eyes filled with something close to awe. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he confessed, and so we didn't kiss again that night. We didn't need to. Instead, we lay side by side on the bed. We barely touched, barely spoke, simply existed in the same space, letting the silence stretch between us like something sacred. The book I'd been reading was forgotten. Its story no longer mattered because the real story, one I never imagined I would live, had just begun. The room grew dim, lit only by the golden haze of streetlights slipping through the blinds. Henry's breathing steadied beside me, though every once in a while I could tell from the subtle shift of his fingers against the comforter that he remained awake. Sleep belonged to a different version of us, a time before confessions and unspoken desires transformed into whispered kisses in a quiet bedroom. I closed my eyes not out of pretense, but because I was left speechless by the fullness in my chest. A weightless pressure I couldn't decipher as joy, fear, or a blend of both. I was terrified to move, convinced that any shift would send him retreating, and I'd be left with a regretful mistake. Then Henry's voice broke the silence again, soft yet clear, sending a jolt through me. He was closer than ever before, his tone resonating with the same intensity he felt. "Yeah," I murmured, admitting to my restless night. He rolled onto his side, and I felt the mattress shift beneath us, the air growing thick. Suddenly his hand reached out and touched my arm, his fingers barely resting, a simple touch that, to me, was seismic. "I've been thinking," he whispered, his breath fanning across my cheek, "about how long this has been in the air between us." I turned my head slowly to meet his gaze. He looked at me as if I were something he'd always longed to hold, but had never known how to keep. His vulnerability was unmistakable, a side I had never seen before. "You mean tonight?" I asked. Henry shook his head slightly, as if recalling a time before, a time when old memories revealed truths we hadn't anticipated. "Before you ever looked back at old memories and realized they meant more than you thought," he murmured. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat, the memory of nights spent watching dumb horror movies, of you falling asleep on my shoulder, resurfacing with an ache I hadn't anticipated. "You remember that?" I asked. "Of course I do," he replied in a voice barely above a whisper. That was the moment I realized I was beginning to see him in a new light, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I shifted my breath as our knees brushed. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked softly. Henry smiled faintly. "I was scared," he admitted. "I was always the guy who seemed to have it all figured out, parties, sports, and playing the role. But then you came along and now my heart's pounding in ways I never expected." I reached for his hand and, without thinking, our fingers laced together firmly and certainly. "You don't have to be scared," I whispered. Henry nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know, but I still am. Not because I don't want this, I want this, but because I'm still learning how to be this." I squeezed his hand and said, "It doesn't have to mean anything right now. You don't need a label. Just be honest with yourself. And with me." He exhaled shakily before shifting even closer. His leg pressed against mine as his body curved toward me like an unanswered question. "Can I kiss you again?" he asked. I didn't answer verbally. Instead, I leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation. His lips met mine with certainty and intent, a kiss that was no longer a mere whisper but a declaration. As our mouths moved slowly at first, tentative and exploratory, something deep and long buried began to surface. The tension built from years of stolen glances, lingering touches, and half-jokes that masked something far more real suddenly snapped into focus. His kiss deepened and grew bolder. My fingers threaded through his hair as I felt him groan quietly, his other hand sliding to my waist and pulling me closer, anchoring me. We broke apart to breathe, our foreheads pressed together as we panted in the darkness. His hands remained on me, firm and unrelenting, as if afraid I might vanish. "I don't want to stop," he murmured. I shook my head and we moved together again, our mouths colliding with a passion that defied the evening's earlier restraint. It wasn't just raw desire. It was years of repression crumbling, walls we had built finally giving way. Henry rolled partly over me, our legs tangling as his body pressed against mine, erasing every distance we had once maintained. In the rush of the moment, he was still careful. His hands roamed as if memorizing every curve and contour, rather than merely claiming what was here. Eventually, we went even further, and to be honest, it hurt quite a bit. Still, it was amazing because we were experiencing it together. I ran my hand along his back, feeling the taut muscles beneath his shirt. He shuddered against me and looked down with dark, uncertain eyes that remained locked on mine. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I smiled breathlessly. "Yeah. Are you?" He nodded, then kissed me again, slower, more deliberately, no longer testing if this was real, but discovering how deeply he could let himself feel it. We stayed wrapped around each other until our boundaries between friendship and something far deeper completely dissolved. It was clumsy at moments, overwhelming at others, but undeniably real. When our bodies finally settled together in the dim light, Henry whispered, "I've never felt more like myself than I do right now." I kissed his temple and held him close. Neither of us had all the answers, but in that moment, tangled on my bed, one thing was clear. This wasn't a passing mistake or mere confusion. It was the beginning of something real. A few hours later, the morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long lines across the sheets and illuminating the soft rise and fall of Henry's chest as he slept beside me. His arm was draped loosely over my waist, his face pressed into the pillow just inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his skin, the steady rhythm of his breath, and the weight of everything we had shared just hours before. I hadn't slept, not really. I spent most of the night watching him, marveling at how surreal it all felt, how something I had only ever dreamed of was now my reality. Not just the kiss, but the tender touches, the confessions, the way he clung to me as if I were the anchor he so desperately needed. Even now I could scarcely believe it. Henry, my best friend, my straight best friend. Except, was he really? I shifted just enough to study his face in the gentle light. He looked peaceful in sleep, almost boyish, his long lashes and slack jaw lending him an air of vulnerability. I wished I could freeze this moment before the world forced us to question everything again. But time was relentless, moving forward whether we were ready or not. Henry stirred, his arm tightening around me briefly as his nose brushed my collarbone. With a groggy sigh, his eyes blinked open. He looked confused for a moment, unsure of where he was or if this was real. Then, as recognition dawned, he whispered, "Hey." "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause, a moment in which I could see his thoughts flit behind furrowed brows. I hated that sudden distance that crept in, especially after hours of such intimate closeness. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, my voice cutting through the silence. He hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I think so. I don't want you to think last night was some kind of mistake." I blinked in surprise. "That wasn't what I expected," I said quickly. Henry interrupted. "I meant everything we did. It wasn't confusion. I did it because I wanted to." My heart loosened a knot of tension. "I don't expect you to have it all figured out," I added, "but I needed to know you wouldn't wake up regretting it." "I don't," he replied firmly. "If anything, I regret not doing it sooner." That left me silent. Henry reached out and gently brushed his fingers against my cheek, as if to confirm that I was still here, still real. "I've been scared for so long," he continued, "afraid this would change everything between us. But last night, it didn't ruin anything. It felt like relief." I turned fully toward him and placed my hand over his. "It felt like I could finally breathe," I admitted. We stayed like that for a while, facing each other, hands intertwined, letting every word settle into something tangible and strong. It was strange how something so new could feel so natural. I had always imagined that if this ever happened, it would be awkward, complicated, filled with second-guessing. But right now, it simply felt like us. Eventually, Henry sat up and stretched, the sheet falling slightly as he ran a hand through his messy hair. "I should probably text Oliver," he said with a faint grimace. "Tell her I'm not going to see her again." At the mention of his world beyond ours, friends, family, everyone who thought they knew him, my stomach tightened. "Are you sure?" I asked. He turned to me with a resolute expression. "Yeah, I don't want to pretend anymore." That word again, pretend. It's been our underlying theme, I murmured as I sat up too, pulling the sheet with me. "You don't have to do everything at once. We don't need to make this something big just yet. Let's let it be ours, for now." Henry smiled and leaned over to kiss my forehead. I loved that. The rest of the morning passed quietly, lighter than before. In the kitchen, while making coffee, we stood close and exchanged small, knowing looks every time our hands brushed. It felt domestic and intimate, a natural progression that had always existed between us, though we had never allowed ourselves to see it clearly. At one point, Henry grabbed his keys and paused in the doorway. "Hey," he said, glancing back. "If I freak out later, as I probably will, just remind me of this moment, okay?" Remind me that it felt right. I nodded and walked over to him, wrapping my arms around his waist. I will. He kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that conveyed a delicate yet precious promise. See you tonight? He asked. Definitely, I replied. And just like that, he was gone. I stood at the window, watching him walk down the street as he always did. This time, however, he glanced back and smiled. In the following weeks, everything changed, even though some things remained the same. Henry still raided my fridge as if he owned the place, still teased me about my book collection scattered across my bed, still left his socks everywhere, and sometimes forgot to replace the toilet paper roll. But beneath those familiar habits, a quiet undercurrent of something more had emerged. A tender brush of fingers across the back of my hand in the kitchen, lingering glances when he thought I wasn't watching, and a gradual erasure of the safe distance we'd always maintained. We didn't discuss labels, not yet. It was too early, too delicate. Instead, we lived each moment. The night when he curled up behind me without a word, his breath warm against my neck. The morning he made coffee and kissed my shoulder so naturally, when he whispered, "I missed you," even though he'd only been gone for a few hours. And yes, we did it again a few times, each encounter measured, never rushed. They built layer upon layer of closeness, drawing us nearer to something we both yearned for but couldn't yet name. There were still moments of doubt, times when I caught him flinching as his phone lit up, as if afraid someone might see too much. Yet, he kept choosing me in his quiet, unsure way. Every time he reached for my hand, I let him, for in those uncertain moments, we were constructing something genuine, something worth holding on to.